Toyota, ever practical, seldom innovative, has finally joined the pure electric vehicle party. Now, it's hard to believe that it's been 14 years since the Mitsubishi i-MiEV introduced Australians to pure electric vehicles, but Toyota has never striven to be first. Instead, they just tried to do it more affordably and more effectively than the early birds. Let's see if they've done it again. This little black number here is the BZ4X FWD for front-wheel drive, which at $66,000 plus on roads is the cheaper of the two variants that went on sale in Australia this March. The other one is the BZ4X AWD, and no, you don't get a star for assuming that means all-wheel drive, which carries a $74,900 price before on roads. Those on roads, by the way, will add around $5,000 to both those figures. Now, if you're wondering about the stupid name, let me decipher it for you. BZ is Toyota speak for Beyond Zero. 4 is where this car fits in Toyota's range in terms of size, and X stands for crossover. Feel better now? But what exactly is it? An SUV or a cross between that and a hatchback? Labelling cars these days is getting harder and harder, so let's leave that to one side and look at the facts. It's longer and wider than a Toyota RAV4 medium SUV, although has a slightly lower roof height. It will be interesting to see how that impacts interior headroom, since the battery of electric vehicles typically sits in the floor structure, meaning occupants sit a little higher. You would be forgiven for thinking, combined with these rugged, chunky black wheel arch guards, which show up a lot better in lighter coloured cars, that this was some kind of rugged off-roader. But it's not, and definitely not in front-wheel drive guys like we have here. Instead, let's call it an urban electric assault vehicle. Okay, let's start at the boot and we'll work our way forward. Now, it's an electrically opening boot. To me, that makes sense when you've got an electric car. It's not related, I just like the synergy. Okay, 452 litres of space. Now, that's not the 542 litres you get with the RAV4, which, as I said, has a similar footprint, but it's still a pretty decent boot nonetheless. Now, we've got 2 tie-downs on each side for a total of 4, plus some underfloor storage, which is conveniently where we keep our charging cables. What else have we got? We've got a retractable cargo blind, locks in there, goes away, and the seats split fold, 60-40 if you've got the bigger loads. All right, back seat. Okay, access to the back seat is through a pretty tall and wide door into what is a predominantly fabric with a few leatherette touches interior. Backseat occupants have a couple of air vents back here, which is great for airflow, along with 2 USB-C ports. Plus, if there's no third occupant in the middle, we get somewhere to park our coffees and our mobile phones. But beyond that and a couple of seat back map pockets, we haven't really got a lot. We do have 2 bottle holders in each door. As for occupant space back here, well, you can see behind my driving position, I've got loads of knee room, pretty decent headroom as well. I'm 172 centimetres for those of you keeping notes at home. The one caveat is under-seat footroom is extremely tight under there. And interestingly, Toyota has persisted with a transmission tunnel, which makes a hump in the floor in the middle, which is really strange given that there is no rear-wheel drive here and there's no prop shaft or drive shaft or anything underneath. I suppose if you did have a smaller person sitting in the middle seat, makes it easier for them to get their feet on the ground. The other comfort amenity we've got is that the backrests actually recline slightly to give you a little bit more of that business class flavour. Okay, now we're in the front seat, and this is where the conventional gives way to the unusual, particularly in this steering column and instrument cluster arrangement. Now, Toyota has placed the instrument cluster further away and further up, so you actually view it over the steering wheel, not through it. Now, this is a driving position that was pioneered by Peugeot some decade or so ago, and while I was not a fan of it in the Peugeots, I've actually found there's less to have a problem with in the Toyota. I don't know if it's the relationship of how they've set it up, but I'm okay having the steering wheel low enough that I can see over it to the instrument cluster, but I still feel like it's high enough in my driving position once I've adjusted the electrically adjustable seat that I don't feel uncomfortable. It's not perfect, but you know what? I reckon I could live with it. Now the driver's instrument cluster is only 7 inches across, so it's a bit on the small side, but at least it has one, unlike a Tesla which doesn't. And the basic level of information it displays is clear, as is the last minute inclusion before it got to Australia of a battery charge percentage, which would have been a strange exclusion if they'd forgotten. The unconventional continues with this weird burger transmission selector. Toyota had a real opportunity to go with buttons here for drive, reverse and park, and they've even left room for the icons. But instead, they've gone with this really warped dial, which they've lifted from the Lexus RZ. I guess they're keen to prevent any recurrence of that nasty unintended acceleration. Next, we've got the 12.3-inch infotainment touchscreen, which has been progressively rolling out across Toyota's range, including the recently updated Toyota RAV4. It's a good system with crisp graphics, fairly easy to use. It has, of course, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, the latter of which has been working flawlessly since we've been testing this car. In addition to that, you've got AM and FM plus digital radio and satellite navigation, and of course, all the Bluetooth and smartphone integration you could ask. Okay, if I was to get picky, it's not the fastest and most contemporary in terms of the graphics it uses, and the size of the icons and text ought to be a bit bigger and use the screen space more effectively, but it's serviceable and it's easy to use once you learn how to use it. As for remote connectivity, Toyota provides 1 year of Toyota connected services, which allows you to use your smartphone to lock, unlock the vehicle, track it and preheat the cabin. But once that 1 year of free runs out, it's $10 a month to maintain it. That's not cheap. Lastly, storage. We've got the typical under armrest bin here, which has a false floor for hiding the crown jewels or any other valuables. We've also got 2 central cup holders for front seat occupants and a slot here for keys or phones. And lastly, I want to talk to you about the glove box, or lack thereof. There is no glove box. Instead, Toyota's used the space behind the glove box for a radiant heater to warm the cabin more efficiently and more effectively than traditional heaters do. Okay, now let's drive. This BZ4X has a 150 kilowatt electric motor driving the front wheels, which is a strange decision because most other car companies are returning to rear drive with their electric cars because of its inherent dynamic advantages. Do you find that strange too? Or maybe you could care less about which wheels are driving the car? Hit me up in the comments below. Historically, Toyota hasn't given much credence to driving dynamics beyond a basic level of competence. Now that all changed, we were told, with the Toyota 86 and Toyota Supra sports cars, which we were also told would infuse Toyota's new age dynamism into all Toyotas. Still, it's a decent powertrain with strong accelerative performance when you need it. Toyota claims 0 to 100 in about 7.5 seconds, which is half a second faster than a hybrid RAV4, for example. There are 2 basic driving modes, which really only change the braking effect and the vehicle's energy recuperation. Toyota has stopped short of making one of those modes a true one-pedal driving system, which can bring the car to a complete stop. The reason given to Drive at the launch by Chief Engineer Masao Uchiyama, and if he doesn't know, who would, is that they want the driver to retain ultimate responsibility for bringing the car to a stop. As for ride quality and driving dynamics, the best thing I can say is that this BZ4X will meet with customer expectations. Typical Toyota, typically competent. Nothing really to complain about. It handles speed bumps really well too, and there's no abrupt hit over those or seams in the road. There is a tad more tyre roar than I was expecting though. The steering is also a touch on the heavy side. I would have expected lighter steering from a Toyota, but it is light enough when you're doing parking manoeuvres or 3-point turns. Lastly, driving range. The BZ4X comes with a 71 kWh battery, which Toyota claims is good for 436 kilometres of driving. Toyota's 16.9 kilowatt energy consumption claim is pretty much spot on what I've experienced in our time together, so my sums suggest 400 kilometres is achievable. That consumption rate, by the way, is better than what we've seen in comparable Kia EV6, Hyundai Ioniq and Ford Mustang Mach-E. But it's not a match for the current king, the Tesla. Recharging rates are also typical Toyota, competitive without being outstanding. 11 kilowatts on an AC domestic charger and up to 150 kilowatts on a DC fast charger. At home, a full charge at 11 kilowatts will take about 7 hours. Okay, and that brings us to the conclusion, and what I've learned is that the BZ4X is pretty much Toyota catching up to the EV crowd. And by EV crowd, we're talking about the Kia EV6, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, of course, the Tesla Model Y, and the Ford Mustang Mach-E, although that last car has its own challenges to deal with. There is a thing called the Subaru Solterra as well, which is a twin under the skin to the BZ4X. Not this one specifically, because Subaru only does all-wheel drive. That's really the only mechanical difference. There are some spec differences and some price differences, but we're not talking about the Solterra today. The Toyota BZ4X is good value without being the best value. It has good energy efficiency without being the best, and it is good on practicality, but it is not the most spacious. It's also a decent car to drive, but it's not the most invigorating EV out there. Are you seeing a trend here? There are a couple of safety omissions on this entry-level BZ4X that I'm not too happy about. Namely, blind spot monitoring and safe exit alert are missing. Toyota provides that on the more expensive all-wheel drive, and it's disappointing to see that held back only for people who can afford it. In summary, the BZ4X is good enough for people who prize the Toyota brand and all that that promises. In isolation, it's a good car, an easy car to live with. Is it the best? No. Is it good enough? Yes. Is it the Toyota of EVs? Of course. Okay, well that's it for me. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, give us a like. If you'd buy a Toyota BZ4X, jump into the comments and tell us what it is you like about this car. Equally, if it's not the EV for you, tell us in the comments what it's missing. And don't forget to subscribe to Drive.com.au on YouTube and hit the notification bell so that when Drive drives new cars, you see it first.